There are those who laugh, work, and move through each day as though everything is under control. Yet beneath the surface, their mind never truly slows down. Every quiet moment becomes another chance to revisit old mistakes, worry about tomorrow, or carry burdens that were never meant to last this long. Little by little, constant tension begins to feel familiar, and peace becomes something they remember rather than something they experience. The hardest part is that life rarely overwhelms us all at once. It does so one thought, one disappointment, and one emotional reaction at a time, until the weight feels impossible to put down. The Stoics understood a truth that remains just as powerful today. Lasting peace is never found by waiting for life to become easier. It is built by strengthening the mind until the world no longer decides what happens within it. Circumstances will always change. People will always have opinions. Unexpected challenges will always appear, but none of them have the authority to rule your inner world unless you quietly hand that authority over. The moment you begin reclaiming it is the moment your life begins changing in ways that cannot easily be taken away. Real peace is not found when the world finally becomes quiet. It begins when the noise outside no longer controls the life inside your mind. That is the quiet promise of Stoicism. Not a life free from hardship, but a mind that remains steady in the middle of it. And once that foundation begins to take shape, you stop searching for peace somewhere in the future. You begin carrying it with you, no matter where life leads. A single moment is often all it takes to change the direction of an entire day. Someone answers with an impatient tone. A message arrives that you were not expecting. A plan you've been looking forward to suddenly falls apart. None of these moments lasts very long. They appear, they happen, and they pass. Yet something unusual begins to happen afterward. The event disappears, but your mind refuses to let it leave. Hours later, while everything around you has already moved on, part of you is still standing inside that same conversation, replaying every word and imagining all the things you should have said differently. The day itself was never destroyed by the event. It was transformed by the attention you continued giving it. This is one of the quiet ways peace slips away. It rarely disappears because life is unbearable. More often it fades because the mind keeps reopening doors that reality has already closed. The Stoics recognized this pattern centuries ago. They understood that external events arrive without asking for permission, but whether they remain inside us is another matter entirely. Marcus Aurelius expressed this idea with remarkable clarity when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Stoicism teaches that there is a difference between experiencing something and becoming possessed by it. The first is unavoidable. The second is often a habit we strengthen without noticing. Every time we revisit an insult, rehearse an argument, or create imaginary versions of what could have happened, we extend the life of an experience that has already ended. It is almost as if the mind believes constant reflection will somehow change the past, even though every replay only deepens the emotional imprint. The event remains untouched, while the person carrying it grows heavier. That weight is rarely imposed by the world alone. Much of it is added by the stories we continue telling ourselves after the moment has passed. Psychology reaches a remarkably similar conclusion. The human brain is designed to notice problems more than peaceful moments because throughout history, survival depended on detecting threats quickly. That instinct once protected our ancestors from danger, but today it often traps us inside emotional loops that serve no real purpose. A brief disagreement can receive more attention than 10 meaningful conversations. One careless comment can overshadow an entire day filled with quiet successes. The mind becomes selective, collecting evidence for discomfort while overlooking everything that remained stable. Without realizing it, people begin training themselves to expect tension. They wake up searching for the next problem before the previous one has even disappeared. Eventually, peace starts feeling unfamiliar, because the mind has spent so much time rehearsing conflict that calmness almost seems suspicious. This is why emotional discipline cannot begin only after life becomes difficult. Waiting until emotions are overwhelming is like trying to learn how to swim after being pulled into deep water. The habits that protect peace are built long before they are needed. Every ordinary moment becomes an opportunity to practice noticing your own thoughts without immediately believing them. Perhaps irritation appears because someone interrupted your plans. Perhaps disappointment arrives because reality refused to follow your expectations. Instead of feeding those reactions automatically, you simply observe them. You acknowledge that they exist without allowing them to become the center of your inner world. That small pause seems insignificant at first, but it quietly changes the relationship between you and your own mind. Feelings continue to arise, yet they no longer dictate every decision. Many people assume this kind of discipline requires suppressing emotions, but Stoicism teaches something much more balanced. The goal is not to become indifferent or emotionally empty. The goal is to prevent emotions from becoming rulers instead of advisors. Every feeling contains information, but not every feeling deserves authority. Anger may reveal that something matters to you, yet it should not determine your response. Fear may encourage caution, but it should not convince you to abandon your values. Disappointment may remind you that expectations were unmet, but it does not have to define the rest of your day. The mind becomes stronger, not by eliminating emotion, but by learning where emotion belongs. When feelings remain visitors instead of permanent residents, they lose much of their power to disturb your peace. Something remarkable begins to happen once this perspective becomes part of daily life. Situations that once consumed your attention start passing through your mind much more quickly. An impatient stranger no longer follows you home. A difficult conversation ends when the conversation ends instead of continuing all evening inside your thoughts. You begin noticing that many people carry their own frustrations into every interaction, and their behavior often reflects struggles that have little to do with you. This realization creates compassion without requiring emotional surrender. Instead of absorbing every negative mood around you, you learn to let it remain where it originated. That simple distinction protects an extraordinary amount of mental energy, leaving more room for clarity, gratitude, and thoughtful action. The world will continue offering reasons to become distracted, offended, discouraged, and emotionally exhausted. That will never change. People will misunderstand you. Plans will fail. Unexpected challenges will interrupt even your best intentions. The real question has never been whether life will test your peace. The question is whether every passing storm deserves a permanent place inside your mind. Stoicism quietly reminds us that inner freedom is built one decision at a time. Every moment you choose not to replay an old wound, not to carry unnecessary resentment, and not to surrender your thoughts to circumstances beyond your control, you reclaim something invaluable. Little by little, your peace stops depending on a perfect world and begins resting on something far more stable. The disciplined mind you are patiently building each day. If these reflections have helped you see your own mind a little more clearly, consider subscribing. Every conversation here is an invitation to practice Stoicism, strengthen your character, and turn timeless wisdom into something you live each day, not just something you listen to. Once you begin noticing that pattern, something even more important comes into focus. The events themselves are not always responsible for the weight you carry. More often, the burden comes from the meaning your mind attaches to those events. A simple comment becomes proof that you are not respected. One mistake becomes evidence that you will never succeed. A delayed response becomes a sign that something is wrong. Reality presents only a small piece of information, but the mind quickly fills the empty spaces with assumptions, predictions, and conclusions that were never confirmed. Before long, you are no longer reacting to what actually happened. You are reacting to the story you created about what happened. That distinction is easy to overlook, yet it quietly shapes the emotional quality of everyday life. The same situation can leave one person almost unaffected, while another carries it for weeks, not because the event was different, but because the interpretation became different. The Stoics understood this with remarkable clarity. They believed that people rarely suffer because of reality alone. Instead, suffering grows from the judgments placed upon reality. As Epictetus famously observed, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Stoicism never claimed that pain, disappointment, or loss should be ignored. It simply reminded us that the first impression is not always the final truth. A difficult moment arrives, and the mind immediately begins offering explanations. It insists that this always happens, that nothing will improve, or that one setback defines the future. Those thoughts often appear so quickly that they feel inseparable from reality itself. Yet they are only interpretations, and interpretations can be questioned. That quiet pause between an event and your judgment of it is where inner freedom begins. The world may influence your circumstances, but it does not have the authority to decide what those circumstances ultimately mean. That responsibility belongs to you, whether you realize it or not. Modern psychology reaches a similar conclusion through a different path. Researchers have long observed that the human mind naturally fills uncertainty with prediction. When information is incomplete, the brain prefers an explanation, even if that explanation creates unnecessary fear. This tendency once helped human beings survive dangerous environments, but in everyday life it often works against us. Instead of waiting for evidence, we anticipate rejection before anyone has rejected us. We prepare for failure before making the first attempt. We replay conversations, searching for hidden meanings that may never have existed. The body remains perfectly safe, sitting quietly in the present moment, while the mind travels into futures that have not arrived or returns to past moments that cannot be changed. Anxiety often grows in places where reality has not yet reached. The imagination creates possibilities, then reacts to those possibilities as though they were already unfolding. This explains why two people can face similar circumstances, yet experience completely different emotional outcomes. One sees a challenge and begins searching for a response. The other sees the same challenge and immediately predicts defeat. One receives criticism and reflects on whether it contains something useful. The other accepts every harsh word as a measure of personal worth. The external situation may be nearly identical, but the internal conversation moves in opposite directions. That conversation becomes the hidden force shaping confidence, resilience, and peace. Most people spend years trying to control their environment, while rarely examining the voice interpreting that environment. Yet the quality of life depends far more on the interpreter than on the circumstances being interpreted. Learning to observe that inner dialogue changes everything, though not all at once. At first, you simply notice how quickly your thoughts race ahead of reality. A small inconvenience becomes a prediction of a terrible day. One unexpected obstacle becomes evidence that everything is falling apart. The mind speaks with great certainty, and because it uses your own voice, it feels trustworthy. But observation slowly weakens that illusion. You begin recognizing that thoughts arrive automatically, while belief remains a choice. Not every thought deserves agreement. Some deserve patience, others deserve silence. A few deserve to be released without further attention. This shift does not remove difficulty from life, but it prevents difficulty from multiplying inside your own mind. As this practice becomes more familiar, another quiet transformation begins. You stop demanding certainty from a world that has never promised it. The future remains unknown, but that uncertainty no longer feels like an enemy. Instead of exhausting yourself by trying to predict every possible outcome, you place your attention on what exists in front of you. The present moment becomes less crowded, because imagination is no longer occupying every corner of it. There is work to be done, conversations to enjoy, lessons to learn, and simple moments to appreciate. None of those experiences require perfect certainty. They only require your presence. Peace starts returning, not because every problem has disappeared, but because your attention is no longer trapped inside problems that have not even happened. The Stoics returned to this principle repeatedly because they understood how easily the mind drifts away from what is real. They practiced bringing themselves back, again and again, to what could actually be known and what could actually be influenced. This was never about limiting thought or avoiding preparation. It was about refusing to confuse imagination with reality. There is wisdom in planning for tomorrow, but there is suffering in living there before it arrives. There is value in remembering the past, but there is little value in becoming imprisoned by it. A disciplined mind learns to distinguish between reflection that produces growth and rumination that produces exhaustion. That distinction protects an extraordinary amount of emotional energy. Gradually you begin trusting something deeper than your predictions. You trust your ability to respond, whatever tomorrow brings. That confidence is quieter than certainty, yet far more durable. It reminds you that life has always contained unknowns, and that you have already survived moments you once believed were impossible to overcome. Every time you choose observation instead of automatic belief, you strengthen that quiet confidence. Your thoughts still appear, your emotions still rise, and uncertainty still visits, but they no longer command unquestioned authority. The mind becomes a place of awareness rather than constant reaction, and in that awareness, lasting peace finds room to grow. That quiet observation begins to create something that many people spend their entire lives searching for without realizing it has been available all along. It creates space. Not physical space, but the kind that exists between an experience and your response to it. At first, the difference feels almost too small to notice. An emotion appears, and instead of immediately following wherever it leads, you remain still for a moment. That single pause changes everything. Before, frustration demanded anger. Disappointment demanded self-criticism. Uncertainty demanded worry. Every feeling seemed to carry an invisible command that had to be obeyed. Now, something new happens. The feeling still arrives, but it no longer speaks with absolute authority. You begin to recognize that an emotion is an experience, not an instruction. It deserves to be acknowledged, but it does not automatically deserve your obedience. This realization is deeply connected to the Stoic understanding of self-mastery. Stoicism never asks a person to stop feeling. Such a goal would be impossible because emotions arise naturally, often before conscious thought has a chance to intervene. Instead, it asks something far more realistic and far more powerful. It asks whether you are willing to examine the emotion before allowing it to shape your actions. That examination may last only a few seconds, but those few seconds protect you from countless decisions made under the influence of temporary states. The emotion says one thing. Reason quietly asks another. Which voice deserves to guide the next step? That question becomes easier to answer each time you practice slowing down instead of reacting immediately. Modern psychology supports this idea in remarkable ways. Studies of emotional regulation consistently show that people who create even brief moments of reflection before responding tend to make better decisions, experience healthier relationships, and recover more quickly from stressful situations. This does not happen because they avoid difficult emotions. It happens because they refuse to become completely identified with those emotions. There is an important distinction between saying, "I feel angry," and believing, "I am anger." The first leaves room for observation. The second leaves almost no room at all. Once emotion becomes identity, it feels impossible to separate yourself from it. Observation quietly restores that separation. You begin to notice that emotions rise, change, and eventually fade, while something deeper within you remains capable of watching the entire process unfold. Nature offers a simple reminder of this truth. Waves crash against the shoreline with tremendous force. Some are gentle, while others seem powerful enough to reshape the coast itself. Yet none of them remains forever. Every wave eventually retreats back into the sea. Emotions behave in much the same way. They arrive with intensity, convincing you they will last indefinitely. But they rarely do, unless the mind keeps calling them back. Replaying the situation, repeating the story, and feeding the feeling with endless attention gives temporary emotions a longer life than they were ever meant to have. Without constant reinforcement, even powerful feelings gradually lose their strength. They complete their natural course and move on, leaving behind an opportunity for understanding instead of exhaustion. This does not mean becoming emotionally distant or pretending that painful experiences have no effect. Some moments deserve sadness. Some situations naturally bring disappointment or grief. As Seneca wisely wrote, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Stoic discipline does not ask you to deny your humanity. It asks you to preserve it by responding with intention instead of impulse. There is wisdom in allowing yourself to experience what is real without adding unnecessary suffering through endless resistance. The person who accepts an emotion without surrendering control discovers a quiet form of resilience. Pain is acknowledged without becoming identity. Frustration is recognized without becoming hostility. Fear is understood without becoming paralysis. Each emotion is treated like a visitor rather than a permanent resident. Eventually, the pause itself becomes second nature. What once required conscious effort begins happening almost automatically. You notice emotions without fearing them. You experience pressure without immediately surrendering to it. You understand that your first reaction is only the beginning of the story, not its conclusion. That understanding changes the quality of everyday life in subtle but lasting ways. Instead of feeling carried away by every passing emotion, you become the steady presence observing them with patience and clarity. The world continues to change, challenges continue to appear, and uncertainty never completely disappears. Yet your inner life becomes less dependent on those changes because you have discovered something far more reliable than favorable circumstances. You have learned that calmness is not a gift life occasionally offers. It is a practice you protect, strengthen, and preserve each time you choose awareness before reaction. The Stoics offered a remarkably simple way of looking at this problem. They believed that every person possesses something no circumstance can truly steal, the ability to choose their own judgments, intentions, and actions. Everything beyond that exists outside complete control. This idea sounds almost too simple at first, but its depth becomes clearer with experience. You cannot decide what another person believes about you. You cannot guarantee success despite careful preparation. You cannot prevent every disappointment, delay, or unexpected change. Yet you always retain the ability to decide how you interpret those moments and what kind of person you will become because of them. That realization shifts the center of your life. Instead of measuring yourself by outcomes that constantly change, you begin measuring yourself by qualities that remain entirely your own. This change does not happen all at once. The mind has spent years looking outward for reassurance, searching for approval, certainty, and control in places where they have never permanently existed. Old habits continue pulling your attention toward questions that have no satisfying answers. Why did someone misunderstand me? What if things do not work out? Why was I treated unfairly? Those questions seem important, yet they often keep your focus trapped on circumstances that cannot be changed. Gradually, different questions begin replacing them. Am I acting with integrity? Am I responding with patience instead of impulse? Am I becoming stronger through this experience instead of becoming more bitter? These questions feel quieter, but they carry far greater power, because every answer depends on something you can actually influence. Modern psychology describes a similar shift through the idea of an internal locus of control. People who build their lives around internal values rather than external circumstances tend to experience greater resilience during hardship. This does not mean they suffer less or avoid disappointment. It means their emotional stability depends less on unpredictable events and more on principles they have chosen deliberately. Their confidence grows from character rather than constant validation. They stop waiting for life to provide permission before feeling at peace. Instead, they discover that peace develops through repeated decisions made under ordinary conditions. Every thoughtful response strengthens the belief that stability can come from within, instead of constantly being borrowed from the outside world. This perspective quietly changes the meaning of success as well. Many people spend years believing success is measured only by visible achievements, favorable outcomes, or recognition from others. While those things may bring satisfaction for a time, they remain vulnerable to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Success built entirely on external conditions is always fragile because those conditions can disappear without warning. The Stoics proposed another measure. They suggested that success lies in meeting every circumstance with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. A difficult conversation handled with patience becomes a success regardless of whether agreement is reached. An honest effort remains valuable even if the final result falls short of expectations. Character becomes the standard, not circumstance. Once that shift takes place, failure loses much of its ability to define your worth, because every challenge becomes another opportunity to practice the qualities you value most. This way of thinking also transforms the experience of pressure. Pressure no longer feels like proof that something is wrong. Instead, it becomes information. It reveals where impatience still exists, where fear continues influencing decisions, and where attachment to outcomes remains stronger than trust in your own principles. Every challenge becomes a mirror instead of a punishment. Rather than asking why life continues presenting obstacles, you begin noticing what those obstacles uncover within you. Some reveal hidden strengths that comfort never could. Others expose habits that quietly limit your growth. Neither discovery is a reason for discouragement. Both become opportunities to understand yourself more honestly. The person who welcomes these lessons develops a steadiness that circumstances alone could never provide. This quiet confidence begins showing itself in ordinary moments, long before anyone else notices it. Delays become easier to accept because they no longer feel like personal attacks against your plans. Criticism becomes easier to evaluate because it is no longer automatically confused with your identity. Praise also changes its role. While appreciation remains meaningful, it stops becoming something you desperately need in order to feel secure. The opinions of others continue to matter, but they no longer determine the direction of your inner life. There is tremendous freedom in reaching that point. It allows you to listen without becoming controlled, to care without becoming dependent, and to participate fully in life without constantly fearing its uncertainties. Over time, the strongest part of your life becomes the part no one else can see. It is found in the quiet decisions made when no recognition is waiting. It appears every time you choose honesty over convenience, patience over frustration, or thoughtful action over emotional impulse. These moments rarely attract attention, yet they slowly shape the kind of person you become. Circumstances continue changing, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, but your foundation grows steadier because it rests on something that cannot be borrowed or taken away. The world still offers uncertainty, disappointment, and unexpected change, yet none of those things possess the final word. What ultimately defines your experience is not the condition of the road beneath your feet, but the character you continue building with every step forward. Ironically, this is often the point where the outside world begins losing its grip on your inner world. Nothing around you has necessarily changed. People are still impatient. Unexpected problems still appear without warning. Some days unfold exactly as planned, while others seem determined to test your patience from the moment they begin. Yet something within you has become different. The comment that once lingered in your thoughts until bedtime now fades within minutes. The inconvenience that once felt personal now appears as nothing more than another passing event. Situations that once consumed your attention no longer earn the same place in your mind. This change is so gradual that you may not notice it immediately. One day you simply realize that something which would have ruined an entire afternoon now barely interrupts a single hour. That is not because life has become kinder. It is because your relationship with life has quietly matured. This transformation surprises many people because they expect inner strength to arrive through dramatic breakthroughs. They imagine waking up one morning completely unaffected by criticism, disappointment, or uncertainty. Real growth rarely works that way. It develops through countless ordinary moments where you repeatedly choose not to surrender your attention. Every time you decide not to replay an argument, not to chase someone else's approval, or not to build an entire story around a single unpleasant experience, you strengthen a habit that eventually becomes part of your character. At first, these decisions require effort. Later, they become instinctive. The mind slowly learns that not every event deserves prolonged attention, and once that lesson settles deeply enough, emotional recovery becomes faster, without requiring constant struggle. One of the greatest discoveries along this path is realizing that much of what once felt personal was never truly about you. People carry invisible burdens everywhere they go. Some live with fears they rarely speak about. Others move through life weighed down by disappointment, exhaustion, insecurity, or frustration that has been building for years. These hidden struggles often shape the way they speak, react, and treat those around them. An impatient response may reflect overwhelming stress rather than disrespect. A harsh opinion may reveal someone's own uncertainty rather than your shortcomings. A dismissive attitude may come from pain that existed long before your paths crossed. Recognizing this does not excuse harmful behavior, nor does it mean accepting mistreatment without boundaries. It simply prevents you from turning every negative interaction into a judgment about your own worth. The Stoics encourage this broader perspective because it weakens the illusion that every uncomfortable experience revolves around us. Human beings naturally interpret events through a personal lens. Someone disagrees, and the mind immediately asks what it says about us. Someone acts coldly, and we search for personal explanations. Yet reality is often far more complicated. Every person is living inside a world of experiences, memories, expectations, and emotional habits that remain largely invisible to everyone else. Their actions emerge from that hidden landscape as much as from the present moment. Once you understand this, you stop carrying responsibilities that never belong to you. You remain accountable for your own conduct while allowing others to remain responsible for theirs. That simple distinction creates extraordinary emotional freedom. Psychology supports this way of thinking through what is often called emotional boundaries. Healthy emotional boundaries do not mean becoming distant or uncaring. They mean recognizing where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Without those boundaries, emotions become contagious. One person's anger becomes your anger. Another person's anxiety becomes your anxiety. Someone else's disappointment quietly settles into your own thoughts until you begin carrying emotional weight that was never yours to begin with. Many people mistake empathy for absorption, believing they must internalize every emotion around them in order to care. In reality, genuine compassion often becomes stronger when it is supported by stability. You can understand another person's suffering without becoming overwhelmed by it yourself. Over time, this steadiness becomes something you carry into every environment. Busy workplaces, crowded streets, family gatherings, unexpected setbacks, and difficult conversations all continue to exist, but they no longer dictate the condition of your mind. Instead of absorbing every emotional current like a leaf carried downstream, you become more like the riverbank itself, steady while the water continues moving. Life still flows around you with all its unpredictability, but your foundation remains rooted somewhere deeper than passing circumstances. This does not mean you never feel disappointment, sadness, or frustration. It means those experiences move through you instead of defining you. They arrive, they teach, and eventually they leave without taking your peace with them. Perhaps this is the quiet freedom the Stoics were pointing toward all along. Not freedom from hardship, because no philosophy can promise that. Not freedom from emotion, because feeling deeply is part of being human. It is the freedom that comes from no longer negotiating your peace with every circumstance that crosses your path. The world continues changing exactly as it always has, but something within you becomes increasingly difficult to disturb. That inner stability cannot be purchased, borrowed, or given by someone else. It is built patiently through disciplined attention, honest reflection, and countless small choices that rarely seem important in the moment. The Stoics understood that comfort reveals very little about character. It is easy to remain patient when nothing challenges your patience. It is easy to remain kind when everyone treats you well. It is easy to feel confident when success comes naturally. Yet those moments do not reveal who you are as clearly as difficulty does. Pressure has a way of exposing habits that comfort allows to remain hidden. A frustrating conversation reveals whether anger still controls your reactions. A disappointment reveals how attached you have become to expectations. An unexpected delay reveals whether your peace depends on life moving according to your personal timetable. None of these situations creates your character. They simply uncover what has already been growing beneath the surface. In that sense, every challenge becomes less of an enemy and more of a mirror, reflecting the parts of yourself that still need attention. Modern psychology supports this idea through the concept of post-traumatic growth. While painful experiences can certainly leave lasting scars, they can also become turning points that reshape a person's values, relationships, and understanding of life. The difference is often found in interpretation rather than circumstance alone. Some people allow hardship to become evidence that life is unfair and that growth is impossible. Others slowly transform those same experiences into sources of resilience, compassion, and clarity. The event itself cannot be changed, but its meaning continues evolving long after it has ended. That is why two people can emerge from similar challenges with entirely different perspectives. One remains imprisoned by the experience, while the other carries its lessons forward without allowing it to define their identity. Growth is not guaranteed by suffering. It comes from the willingness to learn while suffering passes through you. As this understanding deepens, you begin noticing that every challenge carries information. A moment of impatience reveals where expectations have become rigid. A surge of jealousy uncovers comparisons that have quietly taken root. Fear often points toward attachment, showing where security has become dependent on outcomes instead of principles. As Socrates is often credited with saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Even frustration contains valuable insight if you are willing to examine it honestly. Rather than treating uncomfortable emotions as problems to eliminate immediately, you begin treating them as messages, inviting greater self-awareness. This does not mean every emotion is correct, but every emotion deserves to be understood before it is judged. Something else begins changing as well. You stop expecting life to reward your efforts with constant ease. That expectation quietly disappears because you recognize that difficulty is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that you are participating in life fully. Every meaningful pursuit carries uncertainty. Every worthwhile relationship requires patience. Every attempt to grow demands leaving behind familiar habits. Once you accept this, setbacks lose much of their ability to discourage you. They become part of the process rather than interruptions to it. Instead of asking whether life is becoming easier, you begin asking whether you are becoming stronger, wiser, and more capable of meeting whatever comes next with integrity. Over time, the storms that once seemed overwhelming become reminders of how far you have come, not because they grow smaller, but because you have grown steadier. You discover that resilience is not the absence of difficulty, but the quiet confidence that you can face difficulty without losing yourself in the process. Every challenge becomes another opportunity to practice patience instead of haste, courage instead of avoidance, and wisdom instead of impulse. Little by little, life itself becomes your greatest teacher, shaping your character through experiences that no book alone could ever provide. The world continues changing, bringing uncertainty as it always has. But your balance no longer depends on perfect conditions. It rests on something much deeper, a mind that has learned to walk through every storm without forgetting where true stability has always been found. Over time, this way of living begins to produce a kind of peace that no perfect circumstance could ever provide. It arrives so gradually that you may not notice it at first. There is no dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels different. Instead, the change appears quietly in ordinary situations. You wake up without immediately feeling pulled toward yesterday's problems. You move through your morning without allowing every small inconvenience to determine the direction of your thoughts. The world remains as unpredictable as it has always been, but something inside you no longer expects it to behave differently. You stop waiting for life to become completely organized before allowing yourself to feel calm. That expectation slowly fades because experience has shown you that certainty has never been the foundation of lasting peace. The mind finally stops negotiating with reality and begins working with it instead. That single shift changes more than people often realize, because so much unnecessary suffering comes from expecting life to follow rules it never promised to follow. This transformation affects the way your thoughts move throughout the day. Before, your attention was constantly scattered. A criticism from the morning followed you into the afternoon. A mistake from last week interrupted your focus today. Worries about tomorrow competed with responsibilities that belonged to the present moment. The mind rarely rested because it was always traveling somewhere else. Now those distractions begin losing their influence. Your thoughts become clearer, not because problems disappear, but because unnecessary mental noise slowly fades away. There is more room for concentration, more room for gratitude, more room for careful reflection instead of endless rumination. The mind becomes quieter without becoming passive. It remains alert without becoming anxious. This clarity allows you to see situations more accurately because you are no longer viewing everything through layers of fear, frustration, or imagined outcomes. The same quiet change appears in your emotional life. Feelings still arise because they are part of being human, but they no longer decide every choice you make. Anger no longer demands immediate expression. Fear no longer convinces you to abandon meaningful goals. Excitement no longer pushes you toward impulsive decisions. Instead of living at the mercy of emotional highs and lows, you begin experiencing a steadier rhythm. This does not make life less meaningful. If anything, it allows you to appreciate moments more deeply because your awareness is no longer constantly interrupted by unnecessary emotional turbulence. Joy becomes quieter but more genuine. Gratitude becomes more frequent because it no longer depends entirely on favorable conditions. Even difficult emotions become easier to understand because they are observed before they are obeyed. Your relationships naturally begin reflecting this inner stability. When you stop expecting other people to create your peace, you also stop placing impossible expectations upon them. You no longer demand that everyone understand you perfectly before you can remain calm. You stop waiting for constant approval before believing in your own worth. Disagreements become opportunities for understanding rather than competitions to be won. Listening becomes easier because you are no longer preparing your next defense while someone else is speaking. Patience grows because your emotional balance no longer depends on controlling every interaction. The people around you may or may not change, but your way of meeting them certainly does. That alone has the power to transform relationships in ways that force never could. Perhaps the greatest discovery is realizing that tranquility was never hiding somewhere in the future. Many people unknowingly postpone peace until certain conditions are met. They believe they will finally feel calm after achieving success, solving every problem, finding the perfect relationship, or reaching complete financial security. Yet each achievement is usually followed by another expectation, another goal, another source of uncertainty. As Seneca wisely observed, he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. Peace continues moving further away because it has been attached to circumstances that constantly change. The Stoics understood that inner stability cannot be postponed until life becomes perfect, because perfection has never been part of the human experience. The opportunity to cultivate peace has always existed in the present moment, hidden inside ordinary choices that rarely seem significant while they are happening. Looking back, you begin realizing that this transformation was never created by one extraordinary decision. It grew quietly through hundreds of ordinary ones. Every time you chose reflection instead of reaction, you strengthened your character. Every time you released resentment instead of feeding it, your mind became lighter. Every time you accepted uncertainty without surrendering to fear, your confidence deepened. None of those moments attracted attention. Most seemed almost insignificant at the time, yet together they shaped a way of living that no changing circumstance could easily disturb. The world continues offering uncertainty, success, disappointment, joy, and loss in equal measure. Those realities remain part of every human life. What changes is the person walking through them. And once that change takes root deeply enough, peace is no longer something you search for in the future. It becomes something you quietly carry with you, wherever life decides to lead next. The world will continue to change. People will continue to disappoint you. Unexpected challenges will continue to appear. But none of those things have the final say over your inner life unless you give them that power. Every day is another opportunity to choose clarity over confusion, patience over impulse, and wisdom over reaction. That is how lasting peace is built, one quiet decision at a time. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal and for choosing to grow alongside this community. If this message stayed with you, don't stop here. One of the videos on your screen right now will help you continue strengthening your mind and deepening your understanding of Stoicism. Choose the one that speaks to you, and I'll see you there.